Project Phoenix. Chapter 1: Embers of the Past. The smog-choked city of Neo-Gotham stretched before Maya like a grimy tapestry. Perched atop the skeletal remains of a long-abandoned skyscraper, her crimson cloak billowed in the polluted breeze. Below, the ceaseless hum of traffic and the flickering neon signs of 1,000 advertisements painted a picture of a city perpetually on the edge of chaos. Maya, however, thrived in it. She wasn't a hero. Far from it. Maya, or Cinder as the terrified citizens of Neo-Gotham called her, was a thief extraordinaire, a fire-wielding enigma who specialized in the impossible heist. Tonight's target, the impenetrable vaults of the Volkov Corporation, rumored to house a prototype energy core capable of powering the entire city for a year. Cinder crouched on a gargoyle, her crimson eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. Years of practice had honed her senses to an unnerving degree. She could taste the nervous sweat of the Volkov guards patrolling the perimeter, smell the faint thrum of electricity emanating from the vault's security system. With a practiced flick of her wrist, she ignited a fiery whip, the air crackling with energy as it snaked around a support beam, pulling her closer to the building's facade. She scaled the side with the agility of a spider, her boots leaving silent imprints on the cold concrete. Reaching the roof, she slipped into the shadows, her movements as fluid as smoke. The rooftop bristled with security drones, their red eyes scanning the area for any sign of intrusion. Cinder smirked. Drones were child's play. With a whisper and a snap of her fingers, a vortex of swirling flames materialized around her, momentarily cloaking her from the drone's sensors. In that brief window, she disabled the security grid with a touch, her fingers dancing across the keypad like a phantom pianist. A low-pitched hum filled the air as the lockdown deactivated. The vault itself was a marvel of modern engineering, a sleek obsidian cube seemingly impervious to anything short of a nuclear warhead. Cinder, however, possessed a weapon far more potent than brute force. Concentrating, she focused her will, feeling the energy crackle around her. Her eyes blazed with an infernal light as she channeled her pyrokinetic abilities, conjuring a miniature supernova in her palm. The air shimmered with heat, the rooftop itself groaning under the intensity of the inferno. Then, with a roar that echoed through the city, Cinder unleashed the fiery torrent onto the vault door. The obsidian surface glowed white-hot, then buckled inwards with a deafening groan. As the fiery blast subsided, Cinder stood panting, smoke swirling around her, but a triumphant grin plastered on her face. Inside, the vault was a technological wonderland. Row upon row of blinking consoles hummed with alien energy. But Cinder ignored them, her gaze fixed on a single pedestal in the center. Resting upon it was the energy core, a pulsing sphere of pure energy contained within a field of shimmering containment. Just as Cinder reached for the core, a dark figure materialized in the doorway. A man cloaked in black, his features obscured by a featureless mask, his presence as cold and menacing as the steel blade glinting in his hand. He spoke in a voice that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. Cinder. A pleasure, as always. The blood drained from Cinder's face. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She recognized the voice, the chilling cadence that had haunted her nightmares for years. It was Kairos, the enigmatic mastermind behind the shadowy organization known as the Circle. Kairos, she hissed, her voice barely a whisper. What do you want? The core, of course, he replied, his voice devoid of any emotion. It seems our plans align, at least for now. Cinder wasn't fooled. Kairos and the Circle used chaos and destruction as tools in their twisted games. She wouldn't let them get their hands on the core. Before she could react, Kairos lunged, his blade a blur of silver in the dim light. Cinder, relying on instinct honed through years of running from her past, met his attack head-on. A fiery barrier erupted in front of her, deflecting the blade with a shower of sparks. The battle that ensued was a whirlwind of fire and steel. Cinder used her pyrokinesis to its full potential, conjuring flaming whips, scorching blasts, and swirling firestorms. Kairos, however, was a master of hand-to-hand combat, his movements precise, deadly, and seemingly impervious to the heat. The battle raged across the vault, leaving a trail of scorched metal and shattered consoles. Cinder, panting heavily, channeled a final burst of fire, forcing Kairos to back away with a hiss. "You've grown more powerful, Cinder," he acknowledged, his voice laced with a hint of grudging respect. Cinder ignored him, her crimson eyes narrowed. "What do you intend to do with the core?" "That," Kairos said, a cruel smile twisting his lips beneath the mask, "is none of your concern." He lunged again, but this time, Cinder was ready. With a desperate surge of power, she unleashed a torrent of fire so intense it forced Kairos back through the doorway and off the rooftop. Cinder watched him disappear into the night sky, a mixture of relief and unease churning in her stomach. She knew this wasn't over. Kairos never left anything unfinished. Turning to the energy core, she knew a difficult choice lay ahead. Stealing the core from Volkov wasn't exactly a noble act, but she couldn't risk it falling into Kairos's hands. She reached out, feeling the raw power thrumming beneath her fingertips. Suddenly, an alarm blared, the harsh sound echoing through the vault. Volkov security had been alerted. Cinder cursed under her breath. She had no time for a clean escape. Grabbing the energy core, she channeled her flames, creating a fiery vortex around her. In a flash of light and heat, she vanished, leaving only a trail of smoke and the pulsing energy core clutched tightly in her hand. Chapter 2: Smoke and Mirrors. Cinder reappeared in a hidden alleyway on the fringes of Neo-Gotham. The city lights, once a source of excitement, now seemed menacing, a reminder of the dangers that lurked in every shadow. She deactivated the fiery shroud, the energy core radiating a faint warmth in her palm. Looking around, she realized she couldn't stay here. Volkov security would be swarming the rooftops, and Kairos wouldn't be far behind. She needed a safe house, a place where she could figure out her next move. A name flickered in her mind: Jax, an old associate, a smuggler with a network of contacts that stretched across the criminal underworld. He wouldn't ask questions, not for the right price. Reaching into a hidden pocket, she pulled out a small communicator, a battered relic of a bygone era. Jax wouldn't answer a text, not with the Volkov security on his tail. This required a personal touch. Jax's voice, gruff and laced with suspicion, crackled through the speaker. "Cinder? What the hell do you want?" "Meet me at the Rusty Gear," she said, her voice clipped. "I have something valuable." Jax grunted his acknowledgement, the line going dead with a click. Cinder pocketed the communicator, a wry smile playing on her lips. The Rusty Gear was a dingy bar frequented by smugglers, outcasts, and anyone else who preferred the fringes of society. Jax usually held court in a booth at the back, surrounded by a motley crew of bodyguards who looked like they could wrestle a cyborg bear and win. Cinder pushed through the swinging doors, the stale smell of cheap beer and desperation assaulting her nostrils. The bar fell silent as she entered, all eyes turning towards the woman in the crimson cloak. Jax, nursing a mug of something suspiciously green, spotted her right away. He gestured to the booth with a nod, his shaved head gleaming under the dim lights. Cinder navigated the gauntlet of stairs, ignoring the whispered rumors that followed her like a shadow. Reaching the booth, she slid into the seat opposite Jax. His bodyguards, large men with scars that spoke of a violent past, didn't blink. They were used to Cinder's unpredictable appearances. "What brings you to my humble establishment, Cinder?" Jax rumbled, his voice laced with a hint of amusement. "And what's that glowing orb you're trying so hard to hide?" Cinder placed the energy core on the table, the pulsating sphere illuminating Jax's face with an eerie green glow. The smuggler's eyes widened in surprise. "That," she said, her voice low, "is the reason I need your help." Chapter 3: The Price of Power. The flickering neon sign of the rusty gear cast an even more garish light on the scene unfolding inside. Jax sat back in his booth, a thoughtful frown etched on his face. He had spent decades navigating the murky waters of the Neo-Gotham underworld, but this deal with Cinder, the fiery supervillain, felt different. The energy core pulsed on the table, a pulsating beacon brimming with raw power. "So, you want me to find a buyer?" Jax rumbled, his voice heavy with suspicion. "Someone with the resources to handle something like that?" Cinder nodded, her crimson eyes glinting in the neon light. "Someone who wouldn't use it for destruction," she added, her voice laced with a hint of desperation. "Someone who could maybe even use it for good." Jax snorted. "Good? In Neo-Gotham? You're living in a fantasy, Cinder." Cinder knew he wasn't wrong. Neo-Gotham was a city built on greed and violence. Finding a buyer with altruistic motives was like finding a unicorn in a landfill. Still, she couldn't let the core fall into the wrong hands. "Look," she said, leaning forward, her voice low and urgent. "Kairos and the Circle are after this. They won't hesitate to use its power to plunge the whole city into chaos. We can't let that happen." Jax's gaze flickered to the energy core, a flicker of worry crossing his features. The Circle was a force to be reckoned with, a shadowy organization with their fingers in every nefarious pie in Neo-Gotham. He stroked his shaved head, considering his options. He could sell the core to the highest bidder, a move that would undoubtedly line his pockets with enough credits to retire to a beach somewhere far away. But the thought of the core fueling Kairos's chaos-driven agenda sent a shiver down his spine. "All right, Cinder," he finally said, his voice gruff but determined. "I'll bite. But you better believe this is going to cost you." Cinder felt a surge of relief. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. "What do you want?" Jax grinned, a display of gleaming teeth that wouldn't look out of place on a junkyard dog. "I want information." "You've got ears in all the right places, Cinder. Tell me everything you know about Kairos and the Circle." Cinder hesitated. Information was her currency, her leverage in the criminal underworld. But if there was anyone who could stop Kairos, it was worth the risk. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. She told Jax everything she knew about the Circle, their enigmatic leader, and their rumored plans for the city. As she spoke, a sense of dread settled over her. The Circle's agenda was far more complex than she had initially thought, and their ultimate goal was more terrifying than she could have imagined. Chapter 4: Echoes of the Past. The flickering light from a dusty projector cast flickering shadows across the grimy walls of Jax's backroom. Cinder and Jax sat hunched over a makeshift map of Neo-Gotham, the energy core pulsating ominously in the center. Cinder had finished relaying the information she gleaned from her network of contacts. The picture wasn't pretty. The Circle's reach extended far deeper than she had imagined, their tendrils infiltrating every level of Neo-Gotham's corrupt government. "They're everywhere," Jax muttered, his voice laced with frustration. "Like cockroaches in a sewer." Cinder nodded, a grim look on her face. "Their ultimate goal," she continued, her voice barely a whisper, "is to overload the city's core energy grid with the power of this thing." Jax whistled. "That would be bad," he said, a touch of understatement in his voice. "The entire city would go dark, maybe even worse. We're talking widespread chaos, riots, maybe even a complete meltdown of the city's infrastructure." The weight of their situation pressed down on Cinder. She never intended to become a hero, but stopping a citywide blackout seemed like a noble cause, even for a fire-wielding supervillain with a checkered past. Suddenly, a loud bang erupted from the front door of the rusty gear. The sound echoed through the backroom, shattering the tense silence. "Looks like our chat time is over," Jax said, reaching for a concealed pistol tucked under his coat. Cinder rose to her feet, her hand instinctively reaching for the flames dancing at her fingertips. Her crimson eyes narrowed, searching for any sign. A plume of smoke billowed through the doorway, obscuring the source of the intrusion. Jax cursed, his gruff voice a low rumble. "Probably Volkov security," he muttered, gesturing for Cinder to stay behind him. "No," she countered, her voice laced with a steely resolve. "They wouldn't announce their arrival like that." A figure emerged from the smoke, a menacing silhouette against the dim lights of the bar. Tall and cloaked in a dark gray uniform, the figure carried a long, staff-like weapon that crackled with a blue electrical energy. His face was obscured by a featureless mask, but Cinder recognized the weapon and the way he held it. It was one of Kairos's elite enforcers, a man known only as the Conductor. Before Jax could react, the Conductor unleashed a blast of electric energy from his staff. The blue bolt lanced through the air, striking Jax in the chest. He let out a yelp of pain, collapsing to the floor in a heap. Cinder's anger flared hot, her crimson eyes burning with an internal fire. She channeled her fury, flames erupting from her outstretched palms. "You leave him alone," she roared, unleashing a torrent of fire aimed directly at the Conductor. The Conductor, surprised by the sudden burst of flames, barely had time to raise his staff in defense. The heat of the inferno singed the edge of his cloak, but the crackling energy fields surrounding the staff deflected the worst of the flames. He retaliated with another blast of electricity, aiming for Cinder. But she was faster this time. With a flick of her wrist, she conjured a fiery wall in front of herself, the electricity dissipating harmlessly against the inferno. The backroom became a battleground of fire and electricity. Cinder danced around the Conductor's attacks, her flames creating a dazzling light show in the grimy room. She knew brute force wouldn't win this fight. She needed a strategy. A glance at the energy core lying on the table sparked an idea. Focusing her power, she channeled the fire around her, condensing it into a small, intensely burning ball in her palm. This was no ordinary flame, it was infused with the raw energy of the core, making it far more potent than anything she'd ever created before. Taking a deep breath, she launched the flaming projectile at the Conductor. It streaked across the room like a miniature comet, a beacon of fiery fury. The Conductor, caught off guard by this unexpected attack, barely had time to raise his staff in defense. The ball of fire slammed into the energy fields surrounding his staff, causing it to flicker and sputter. A moment later, with a deafening crack, the energy field overloaded, collapsing inwards on itself. The Conductor stumbled back, his hands flying to his staff as it emitted a shower of sparks. Cinder seized this opportunity. With a final, desperate surge of fire, she engulfed the Conductor in a blazing inferno. He screamed, but the sound was drowned out by the roar of the flames. A few seconds later, the flames subsided, leaving a smoldering crater where the Conductor had once stood. Cinder stood panting, her breath ragged, her vision blurring with exhaustion. She had won, but at a cost. Jax lay motionless on the floor, his fate uncertain. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the smoke-filled room, a chilling whisper that sent shivers down Cinder's spine. "Impressive display, Cinder," it said. "But don't think for a moment that you've won." Cinder spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. Standing in the doorway, shrouded in shadow, was Kairos himself. A cruel smile played on his lips, a smile that promised more battles to come. "The game has just begun," he said, his voice dripping with malice, before vanishing into the smoky night. Cinder stared at the empty doorway, the weight of Kairos's words settling on her like a leaden cloak. Dread coiled in her gut, a cold counterpoint to the lingering embers of fire around her. She rushed to Jax's side, her fingers brushing against his neck, searching for a pulse. Relief flooded her as she felt a faint but steady beat. He was alive, but unconscious. The electrical blast from the Conductor must have knocked him out. She couldn't stay here. This place was compromised, and Kairos wouldn't be far behind. With a surge of determination, Cinder hoisted Jax onto her shoulder. The man was surprisingly heavy, but adrenaline fueled her movements. She grabbed the energy core, its warmth a comforting presence in her palm, and sprinted towards a hidden escape route she knew of, a rickety fire escape leading down to a labyrinthine network of alleyways. Reaching the fire escape, she clambered down, the rusty metal groaning under her weight. The cool night air hit her face, laced with the acrid tang of smoke and the distant wail of approaching sirens. She had to disappear, and fast. Weaving through the maze of back alleys, her cloak billowing behind her like a crimson flame, Cinder formulated a plan. Jax needed medical attention, but taking him to a hospital was too risky. She needed a safe haven, a place where she could tend to his wounds and figure out her next move. The answer came in the form of a flickering neon sign, the Iron Owl. It was a bar frequented by down-and-out mercenaries and ex-military types, a place where loyalty was measured in credits and questions were rarely asked. It wasn't the ideal hideout, but it would have to do. Pushing open the creaky door, Cinder was greeted by a cacophony of drunken laughter and bawdy songs. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and desperation. She scanned the room, spotting a lone figure at a corner booth, a man with a shaved head and a cybernetic eye that gleamed like a red ember. It was Bolt, a former special ops soldier turned mercenary for hire. He owed her a favor, a debt incurred during a particularly hairy escape from a Volkov security operation gone wrong. This was her best shot. Approaching the booth, she ignored the curious stares and lewd comments thrown her way. Reaching Bolt, she leaned down, her voice a low hiss. "Bolt," she said, her eyes blazing with urgency. "I need your help. Jax is hurt, and Kairos is after us." Bolt raised an eyebrow, his expression a mask of indifference. "Sounds like your problem, Cinder." "Not this time," she countered, placing the energy core on the table. "This concerns more than just me. And besides," she added, a sly smile playing on her lips, "I'm willing to pay your usual rate, plus a bonus for discretion." Bolt's cybernetic eye flickered, his gaze fixated on the pulsating energy core. He knew how valuable these things were on the black market. Money talked, and Cinder was offering a king's ransom. "All right, Cinder," he finally said, his voice gruff. "You've got yourself a deal. But you better make it worth my while." Relief washed over Cinder. She had an ally, albeit a temporary one. For now, that would have to be enough. She needed to get Jax patched up, figure out a way to ditch the energy core, or perhaps use it as leverage against Kairos, and most importantly, prepare for the inevitable confrontation with the enigmatic mastermind and his circle. The battle for Neo-Gotham had just begun, and Cinder, the fire-wielding rogue, found herself thrust into the heart of a conflict far bigger than she ever imagined. She wasn't a hero, but with the fate of the city hanging in the balance, she might not have a choice but to become one. Chapter 5: Scars and Secrets. The Iron Owl reeked of cheap beer, stale sweat, and a faint undercurrent of desperation. Cinder, perched on a stool at Bolt's booth, nursed a glass of something that vaguely resembled whiskey. Jax lay unconscious on a makeshift bed in a back room, Bolt's gruff but surprisingly efficient medic, a woman with a name nobody dared to remember, tending to his wounds. "He'll live," Bolt grunted, downing his drink in one long gulp. "Took a nasty jolt from that electric toy the Circle goon was packing. But he'll be out of commission for a while." Cinder nodded, a silent conversation passing between them. Jax was more than a source of information, he was a friend, one of the few she had in this grimy city. "So," Bolt continued, wiping his mouth with the back of his cybernetic hand, "what's the deal with that fancy glowing rock you plopped on the table?" Cinder hesitated. The energy core wasn't just a source of immense power, it was a potential bargaining chip, a key to unraveling Kairos's plans. But revealing too much could be a risky game. "It's a prototype energy core," she finally offered, her voice kept low. Volkov Industries was developing it, but someone, she gave him a pointed look, wanted it for less than legitimate purposes. Bolt's eye narrowed. "The Circle?" What do they want with such a thing? They want to overload the city's core grid, Cinder explained, her voice laced with dread. Cause a massive blackout, maybe even cripple the entire infrastructure. It wouldn't be pretty. Bolt whistled, a low, surprised sound. Even a mercenary like him understood the potential havoc that kind of power could unleash. So, what now? You gonna sell it? Cinder shook her head. Selling it creates more problems. I need to find a way to use it against Kairos, or at least find someone who can. Easier said than done, Bolt remarked, his voice gruff but laced with a hint of begrudging respect. He might be a hired gun, but even he wasn't a fan of citywide chaos. A tense silence filled the booth, broken only by the murmur of the other patrons and the occasional drunken brawl. Cinder closed her eyes, her mind racing. There had to be a way to stop Kairos, but where to begin? Suddenly, a flicker of memory sparked in her mind. A name, a whisper from a forgotten mission, a rumor swirling in the underbelly of Neo-Gotham's criminal network. A name that sent a shiver down her spine. The Phoenix Project, she murmured, the name tasting strange on her tongue. Bolt looked at her, a curious glint in his cybernetic eye. Never heard of it. It's not something you'd normally hear about, Cinder admitted, a cold dread settling in her stomach. It's a legend, a rumor about a hidden facility, a place where scientists are said to be working on alternative energy sources. Bolt raised an eyebrow. Alternative as in what? Cinder met his gaze, her voice barely a whisper. Alternative as in harnessing energy from something else. Something beyond our understanding. The weight of the revelation hung heavy in the air. Cinder knew it was a long shot, but it was the only lead she had. The Phoenix Project, if it even existed, could be the key to stopping Kairos, or it could be the key to unleashing a whole new kind of chaos. Let's find out, Bolt said, a grim determination etched on his face. He may not be a hero, but facing the unknown was something he understood all too well. Chapter 6, Echoes in the Dark. The flickering neon signs of Neo-Gotham's underbelly cast an eerie glow as Cinder and Bolt followed a trail of whispers and rumors. Their destination, a forgotten sector of the city, a labyrinthine maze of abandoned warehouses and rusting factories, a place known as the Iron Boneyard. This place gives me the creeps, Bolt muttered, his hand hovering near the pistol strapped to his thigh. Cinder, however, was lost in thought. The rumors about the Phoenix Project were vague at best. Stories of maverick scientists, government conspiracies, and a hidden facility fueled by a mysterious energy source. It sounded like something out of a cheap sci-fi flick, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Their guide, a wiry informant with a nervous twitch and a permanent sheen of sweat on his brow, led them through a maze of crumbling concrete and rusted metal. The Iron Boneyard lived up to its name, a graveyard of industry where decaying hulks of machines loomed like skeletal sentinels against the polluted night sky. This is it, the informant wheezed, pointing to a half-collapsed building, its facade adorned with faded graffiti and skeletal outlines of once proud logos. Used to be a Volkov research facility. Shut down years ago, or so they say. Cinder eyed the building with suspicion. It looked more like a condemned death trap than a hidden research facility. But they had come too far to turn back now. All right, you've earned your credits, she said, tossing a small pouch of coins towards the informant. He snatched it with a desperate eagerness and scurried away into the darkness. Turning to Bolt, Cinder drew a deep breath. Ready? Bolt checked his weapons, a grim nod his only response. They entered the building, the air thick with dust and the cloying scent of decay. Moonlight streamed through gaping holes in the roof, casting long, distorted shadows on the cracked walls. The place was eerily silent, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the debris-strewn floor. Cinder, ever vigilant, scanned the shadows, her hand hovering near the flames dancing at her fingertips. As they ventured deeper into the building, they stumbled upon remnants of the facility's past, discarded laboratory equipment, half-written equations scrawled on dusty blackboards, and broken computer terminals with flickering screens. It was as if the scientists had vanished in a hurry, leaving their work unfinished. Suddenly, a faint whirring sound echoed through the building, growing louder as they approached a heavy metal door at the end of a dimly lit corridor. Cinder and Bolt exchanged a glance, a mixture of curiosity and trepidation in their eyes. Bolt, ever the pragmatist, pushed against the door. It creaked open with a rusty groan, revealing a passage bathed in an otherworldly blue light. "Well, this doesn't look ominous at all," Bolt muttered, his voice laced with a hint of sarcasm. Cinder stepped forward, the energy core pulsing warmly in her hand. A strange energy emanated from the passage, a feeling that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. It felt like power, but a different kind of power, something alien and unknowable. Taking a deep breath, Cinder led the way, her senses on high alert. The blue light intensified as they walked, revealing a vast chamber filled with strange, otherworldly technology. Glowing tubes hummed with an alien energy, and intricate consoles pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm. In the center of the chamber stood a massive structure, an intricate lattice of metal and glowing crystals, crackling with the same blue energy that filled the room. Cinder could feel the power radiating from it, a raw, untamed force that sent a shiver down her spine. "This is it," she whispered, awestruck by the sight before her. "The Phoenix Project." Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber, cold and metallic, seemingly emanating from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Welcome, Cinder," the voice said. "You shouldn't be here." Cinder spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. In the shadows at the far end of the chamber stood a figure cloaked in a dark robe, its face obscured by a hood. The only sign of life was a pair of glowing blue eyes that burned with an unsettling intensity. "Who are you?" Cinder demanded, her voice a steely whisper. "I am the guardian of this place," the figure replied. "And you," it continued, its gaze shifting to the energy core in Cinder's hand, "have brought something that doesn't belong." Cinder tightened her grip on the core. This was the answer she had been searching for, but who knew what dangers it might unleash? "I need this," she declared, her voice unwavering. "To stop Kairos and the Circle. They'll use it to destroy the city." The figure remained silent for a moment, its glowing eyes scrutinizing Cinder and Bolt. Then, it spoke again, its voice laced with a hint of something that sounded like respect. "You are not who I expected, Cinder," it said. "But your intentions are clear. The Circle must not be allowed to succeed." With a wave of its hand, the room filled with the same blue energy that pulsed from the Phoenix Project. Cinder braced herself, expecting an attack, but instead, the energy enveloped the core in a swirling blue cocoon. The raw power of the core seemed to diminish, replaced by a calmer, more controlled hum. When the light subsided, the core was transformed. Gone was the pulsating red glow, replaced by a cool blue sheen. It still radiated power, but it felt different. Regulated. "What did you do?" Cinder demanded, her voice a mixture of awe and suspicion. The figure tilted its head, the glowing eyes seeming to bore into her. "I have neutralized the core's destructive potential," it explained. "It still possesses immense power, but it can now be used for good, not chaos." Cinder stared at the transformed core, her mind racing. This was a game changer. With this modified core, she could potentially stop Kairos without unleashing a new type of energy crisis. "Can I use it to overload Kairos's system?" she asked, a flicker of hope igniting in her crimson eyes. The figure remained silent for a moment, the weight of its decision hanging in the air. "Perhaps," it finally said. "But be warned, the consequences are unpredictable. This power is not fully understood." Cinder knew the risks, but the alternative was worse. She had to take a chance. "I'll do it," she declared, her voice filled with a newfound resolve. "I have to stop Kairos." The figure nodded, a faint sense of approval emanating from its cloaked form. Then take the core, it said, extending a hand. Use it wisely, Cinder. The fate of Neo-Gotham may rest in your hands. Cinder reached out and took the core, the cool blue energy tingling against her skin. A wave of dizziness washed over her, images of complex energy grids and control panels flashing in her mind. The knowledge of how to use the core, how to weaponize it against Kairos, flooded her consciousness. Suddenly, an alarm blared through the chamber, red lights strobing ominously. We've been compromised, the figure boomed, its voice laced with urgency. You must leave. Now. Cinder glanced around, her eyes landing on a hidden passageway she hadn't noticed before. This way. She yelled, shoving Bolt towards the passage. They sprinted through the darkness, the pounding of heavy footsteps echoing behind them. Cinder could feel the heat of pursuit, the desperate attempts of whoever had triggered the alarm to stop them. They burst out of the hidden passage, finding themselves back in the crumbling warehouse. Sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer with every passing second. Someone had alerted the authorities, perhaps the remnants of Volkov's security or even Kairos himself. We need to disappear, Bolt grunted, his voice strained. Cinder grabbed his arm and pulled him towards a rickety fire escape clinging to the outside wall. Not without a parting gift, she said, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Focusing her will, she channeled a torrent of flames towards the entrance of the facility. The fire roared to life, engulfing the doorway in a wall of inferno. It wouldn't be enough to hold them off forever, but it would buy them some time. They scrambled up the fire escape, disappearing into the labyrinthine maze of the iron boneyard just as the first figures clad in black uniforms burst through the burning doorway. Cinder, clutching the modified core in her hand, felt a surge of a new emotion, not just determination, but a flicker of something that felt suspiciously like hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could turn the tide against Kairos and save Neo-Gotham from the brink of destruction. The night was still young, and the battle had just begun. The cold metal of the fire escape bit into Cinder's skin as she and Bolt clambered down, their escape a desperate scramble punctuated by the distant wail of approaching sirens. They landed in a shadowy alley, the stench of stale garbage and forgotten dreams clinging to the air. Where to now? Bolt grunted, his breath ragged from exertion. Cinder scanned the maze of alleyways, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Their pursuers wouldn't be far behind, and the iron boneyard was likely compromised. They needed a safe haven, a place to regroup and formulate a plan. There, she said, pointing towards a flickering neon sign above a dilapidated building. The rusty gear. Bolt raised an eyebrow. Jax's place? Isn't that a bit risky? Risky, yes, Cinder admitted. But it's the only place I know where we won't be immediately recognized. With a shared look of determination, they sprinted towards the bar, hoping against hope that Jax had recovered and that the place hadn't been ransacked by Kairos's goons. Pushing open the creaky door, they were greeted by a scene of surprising normalcy. A handful of patrons nursed their drinks at the bar, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. Behind the counter stood a gruff-looking man with a shaved head and a cybernetic eye Jax, looking a little worse for wear but surprisingly upright. Cinder? Bolt? He rasped, his voice hoarse. What the hell happened? Cinder wasted no time explaining. Briefly, she recounted their encounter with the Phoenix Project, the modified core, and their narrow escape from the collapsing facility. Jax listened intently, a grimace etched on his face. So, you think this fancy new core can stop Kairos? Cinder nodded, a flicker of uncertainty flickering in her eyes. The Guardian seemed to think so. But it's a gamble. The core's power is still unpredictable. Jax sighed, rubbing his temples with a hand. This city never gets any less crazy, does it? He glanced towards the window, where the glow of approaching sirens painted the night sky red. Looks like our little reunion is about to be interrupted. Cinder straightened, her crimson eyes burning with defiance. We can't let them take us or the core. We need to fight. Bolt hefted his pistol, a grim smile playing on his lips. Always up for a good brawl, he said, his voice laced with a hint of dark humor. Jax, despite his injuries, grabbed a length of pipe from behind the counter. All right then, he said, his voice gruff but determined. Let's show them what Neo-Gotham's underbelly is made of. As the sirens reached a crescendo, the door of the rusty gear burst open. Silhouetted against the flashing red lights stood a group of figures clad in black, Kairos' enforcers. The leader, a tall, imposing man with a cruel smile, stepped forward. Cinder, he said, his voice dripping with malice. You shouldn't have come back. Cinder met his gaze, the core pulsing with a cool blue light in her hand. This time, she declared, her voice ringing with newfound confidence, it's you who's going down. The bar erupted in chaos. A desperate battle for the fate of Neo-Gotham, waged in a grimy, neon-lit corner of the city. Cinder, fueled by a newfound sense of purpose, unleashed a torrent of flames against the attackers. Jax, his injuries forgotten in the heat of the moment, swung his pipe with surprising ferocity. Bolt, a whirlwind of bullets and well-placed kicks, took down his opponents with ruthless efficiency. The rusty gear became a battleground, the air thick with smoke and the sounds of clashing metal and grunts of pain. Cinder, her movements fueled by adrenaline, fought with a ferocity that surprised even herself. Each burst of flame, each strategic use of the core's newfound power, pushed back the tide of attackers. But Kairos' forces were relentless. One by one, Jax and Bolt started to show signs of fatigue. Cinder, feeling a familiar wave of exhaustion, knew they couldn't hold out much longer. Just as despair threatened to engulf her, a memory sparked in her mind, the knowledge downloaded by the Guardian, the way to interface with the core, to weaponize it in a controlled manner. Taking a deep breath, she focused her will, channeling the core's power into a specific frequency. A surge of blue energy erupted from the core, not as a destructive blast. A surge of blue energy erupted from the core, not as a destructive blast of fire, but as a focused wave that slammed into the attackers' communication devices. The men flinched, clutching their heads as a piercing whine filled the air. Their movements became erratic, their communications scrambled. Cinder seized the opportunity. Focusing again, she sent another pulse of energy, this time targeting the control systems of their weapons. With a series of sputters and hisses, the guns sputtered and died, falling harmlessly to the floor. The tide of the battle turned. Disarmed and disoriented, Kairos' men fell back in confusion. The leader, his cruel smile replaced by a look of shock, stared at Cinder with newfound respect, perhaps even fear. You've changed the core, he stammered, his voice laced with disbelief. Cinder held the core aloft, the blue light pulsing in her hand. This city has changed me, she declared, her voice ringing with newfound power. And it's not going to be ruled by the likes of you. Seizing the moment of confusion, Jax and Bolt launched a final assault. With renewed vigor, they drove the remaining attackers back out the door, the sound of retreating footsteps echoing through the smoky haze. The rusty gear stood silent, the air thick with the smell of burnt gunpowder and sweat. Cinder, leaning against the bar, chest heaving, looked at Jax and Bolt. A weary smile spread across her face. We did it, she said, her voice hoarse but filled with relief. Jax chuckled, a dry rasping sound. For now, he added, his eyes flickering towards the window. But knowing Kairos, this is far from over. Cinder knew he was right. Their victory was temporary, a reprieve in the ongoing battle against the Circle. But for now, they had bought themselves some time, and more importantly, hope. Hope that they could use the modified core to find a way to dismantle Kairos' network, to expose his plans and liberate Neo-Gotham from his grip. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky a pale orange, Cinder stood on the rooftop of the rusty gear, the city sprawling beneath her like a sleeping giant. The core pulsed warmly in her hand, a symbol of her newfound power and responsibility. She was no longer just a fire-wielding rogue, but a reluctant hero, thrust into the heart of a conflict far bigger than she ever imagined. The battle for Neo-Gotham had just begun, but Cinder, with her newfound allies and the power of the core, was ready to fight. The city may be shrouded in darkness, but a flicker of hope had ignited, and Cinder, the fire-wielding rogue, was determined to keep it alive.
Subscribe for more.